I'm just so taken by how clever it's been and how entertaining it's been for humans to apply mathematics, to really look closely at the way that days and nights move, at the way that the seasons pass, and to make the determination way before the current epoch that there are ways that you can cordon off time in terms of sections. You can break it into 12 or 13 months. You can break it into 13 if you're going by lunations. You can break it into 12, and then you figure out how it's just very clever and it's very entertaining. One of the things that came to mind to bring up in this conversation is the Hindu understanding of Leela and Maya. Are any of you familiar with that? It's easy to look up and easy to learn about. Um, Leela and Maya are very similar to what the Zen teachers say. Before awakening, you chop wood and carry water, and after awakening, you chop wood and carry water. It's similar to that. So that Maya is the way that we are with our really attending to taking everything very seriously and looking for what's wrong and trying to figure out how to correct what's wrong, and all of the ways that we've been deeply socialized to live in our lives, to live our lives this way, really fixing stuff. That's Maya. That's like samsara in Buddhism. Then Leela is a very different orientation, same stuff, but what's going on is just what's going on, and it becomes entertainment instead of being so weighty and important and stressful. So I think that's an interesting thing to consider in terms of time.
Yeah.
Like, were our ancestors way back who were trying to figure out, oh, so how can we like make a calendar? Like, were they just having fun?
I think it's interesting too, is not just that, I mean, we're dividing time now with atomic clocks, just in unimaginably small increments. But they have done a lot of research showing that people, when they're out in the natural world, their perception of time slows considerably. And so one of the reasons for that is the time in nature affects dopamine levels, and concurrent with that, they've looked at how people with certain dopamine related disorders, Parkinson's disease, severe ADHD, they too will have a very significant kind of time perception um, error as part of that struggle, that physiological struggle. So to me, perception of time is, since this is a human invention, time is a big part of it.
That's very interesting. There's social science data that indicate that the reason we even are fussed about time or consider time in the first place is because of memory.
Mm-hmm.
And that memory gives us the experience that there is this past that's gone forever, this present that is all consuming or potentially, if we're paying attention, and this unfathomable future, and that it's moving in one direction. And then Newton came along and said, yep, in fact, we're going to theorize that it is, and it's not going to have anything with your perception. It's just going to be a theory. It moves in one direction all the time, no matter what you or anybody else does, a planet, anything. We just got this line of time, which was an idea. But this that we have memory leads us into being curious and really seduced by this notion of time. The other thing that shows up in the social science literature is that we tend to attend to time. Each of us is doing this right now, I suppose, second by second, second by second. And that there are really ways that because of memory, that like Kurt Vonnegut discovered in his Slaughterhouse-Five at the end of it, when he created the Tralfamadorians, or talked about how they could see all time at all time. And this was the way his character could deal with the destruction at Dresden, that all time exists at all time. So we have the capacity to consider that kind of non-directional time, that all time exists at all time. We can consider that.
And
But-
and I would say modern, you mentioned Newton, but modern physicists, beginning with Einstein and probably somewhat slightly before him, they've seen time as something laid out in its entirety, like a landscape, past, present, and future exist together. And it's because of memory, and it's because of other things that the human perception puts it in such a strong linear fashion. But in fact, it's influenced by gravity and the speed of light. You know, if they say that if you would spend a year on the top of Mount Everest, you would ring in the new year 15 microseconds
Right, right.
earlier than somebody down at sea level, because the closer they are to the mass and the gravitational force of that mass, being the Earth at sea level, the slower time literally goes. I mean, we can measure this with science, and so that blows my mind.
Well, and we also know that if our bodies could survive going the speed of light, or if our bodies could survive being nearer and nearer to a black hole, by the time we got back from the journey, and the chances of surviving that are very slim, but if they could survive, when we got back from the journey, we would be blown away by how much time had passed on Earth.
Yeah, that wasn't there something like they called it the famous twin experiment. So one twin goes out at the speed of light and then comes back and finds that her twin has actually here on Earth aged considerably faster and,
Yeah,
and,
I
and
don't-
further
yeah.
than she has. So that's some out there thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you think about this? Is nature and time and the way that they dance with each other. Einstein said and showed us that this construct, this idea of time and the idea of an observation of space weave together with each other. And that weave, like Gary was saying, is seamless, but it is disrupted by mass. Mass always disrupts it. But you know, the mass of the planet, our planet, is not, that's what you just described, only 15 microseconds.
Yeah.
Yeah. The mass of our planet is not big enough to warp the space-time continuum enough for us to have the objective experience
Yeah.
of that. I mean, 15 microseconds, what's that? You know, you can fly a jet plane your whole career and you're going to age less than somebody else who was born the same day, but it's so infinitesimal that nobody's going to,
Yeah.
you can't see it.
Not
and they
really a
can't see
cause
it.
for celebration.
Right. So what are some of your thoughts?
This is Carol here, and I noticed when COVID hit, and this is not anything to do with altitude really, although I do live at a higher altitude. When COVID hit, I had nothing to rush back for. I'd go for walks. I usually leave around sunrise for walks with my dogs, and I'd be coming home at 12 and 1 o'clock, when normally I had to be watching my watch and rush home. And now it's like, what do I rush home for? You know,
Yeah.
it was wonderful. Slowed me way down.
Wow.
Yeah, and
Wow.
I think that is quite interesting, the commodification of time or the use of time. It's like anything, you know. I remember when it occurred to me that the basis of all religions is this kind of wonderful mystical realism. If there's this mystery at the base of every single religion, there's many things that are shared in common. But when you turn it into an organized religion, it's very easy to use for crowd control. And it feels to me that time is often used as crowd control. And so, Carol, when COVID hit, you weren't going to jump in with the rest of the crowd and be controlled. Didn't need to. It
Yeah.
wasn't necessary.
Yeah, and you know,
Well-
go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I wasn't having to stay at home either. I was one of the few people that could still enjoy what I like to do without being in touch with other people. But a lot of people weren't out. I would spend most of my mornings watching this lake. I found a colony of breeding birds that hadn't been documented before in Colorado, and I have not told anybody because I was afraid of all the photographers coming.
Sure.
I took thousands of pictures and monitored them from, it was April 30th, I think, that I found that first breeding nesting was a grebe. And I watched them until August. Almost every morning I was up there, and everybody got to know me, and they'd slow their car down. So I was on the side of the road, and they go, "Are you looking at the geese?" And I go, "Yeah."
Wow.
But you
They
wouldn't
never-
say new bird, yeah.
Yeah, people weren't really out either, they really weren't. Not like now. It would be hours before a car would go by. It was
Wow.
wonderful.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, those were different times. And I'm thinking too that, yeah, we've got the clocks and we can divide almost to infinity time, but I'm more interested, I think, in time being expressed as rhythms, like we've talked about with the plants coming up, with the role of the sun, with the change of the seasons, and even among humans, that it's interesting that we tend to, with each other, kind of synchronize rhythms. Think what happens when you're listening to music and you dance. If you're on the dance floor, there's kind of a synchronizing of the rhythm, and the rhythm to me can be a way to imagine the marking of time, the marking of passage, the passage of time, and even conversation and walking with other people. They've found that there is a kind of a mutual entrainment, if you will. Your rhythm becomes my rhythm becomes your rhythm, and so we're unfolding together in quite a unique way when you really think about it.
Always, even right this minute, virtually.
I know when I was young, I had a house full of girls at college, and our periods all synchronized after
Yes,
a few months of living together, which I thought was interesting that, we didn't do anything to make that happen, but it did.
That's fascinating.
That's a real thing, for real. I love that you actually experienced that. Yeah. That's all pheromones, right?
I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, that we take our
The other
cues
thing
from.
I wanted to say is, when I was a kid, my dad was a geologist and he worked for the Cheyenne Arapaho tribe. And they explained circular time to me. And when I was 9 and 10, I understood circular time. I felt it, I knew it. I can't explain it now. I've got too much other stuff layered on, but it was fascinating that they really do see time as circular.
Peggy, I think you've still got it. I do. So don't give up on that.
I know. I have tried and tried and tried to recapture that feeling, because it was a internal physical feeling of understanding it.
Yeah. Well, that's why I think stop trying and watch your dreams, because the physical.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just a thought, but give that a try, because that kind of thing. I mean, I'd be curious to hear what you find in that, very slow, very gentle, no place to get investigation. Just don't try and see what happens. And then my guess is that those things are so remind us of the truth of who we've been for generations. It takes a while longer for those of us who are very deeply socialized into Western culture and sometimes we don't have a chance. But since you understood it at 9, the chances, I mean, I feel like it's riding a bike. Anyway, I'm being a bit of a cheerleader, but.
Okay.
Well, and I think your point about for generations is so true, because circularity, as far as how the world works and how nature works and how human lives work, I think for most of human existence was with the driving mythology, theology. And I mean, if you go back to the oldest myths we've got, especially the myths with archetypal feminine characters, that was a considerable aspect of the feminine that was celebrated. It's the circularity of things, the circularity of life. So I think there's probably, you're right, an inclination to be able to maybe slot back into that perception of circular time. I'd sure like to get there.
Well, I think any of us probably could actually. I just am very
Yeah.
excited by your story because you had a moment that many people who are deeply socialized and enculturated in Western sensibility don't have,
Yeah.
and that
I
you
think
all
the one time I really feel it or think I can almost get there is when I'm talking with maybe my Salish friends about the seasonal round and how that developed, which is, they followed the migrations of animals. They were dependent on the plants and when they came to fruit. And so that sense of every year it comes around again, and the animals may be different, but it's still the bison are doing this and the deer are doing that. So it's not an individual time chronology, it's more of a universal thing, and that's the closest I can get.
yeah, this
That
is
reminded me of a Hopi explanation that I got from a professor at Michigan. He was an anthropologist and a linguist. And a lot of the discussion was about how language reflects our view of reality, including time. But in that explanation of circular time, I recall there wasn't a way to say past, present, future. There were
Right.
only two parts of time. There was manifest and unmanifest. And manifest is what people carried with them over the generations and over time. What was in human memory is manifest time. And what has not yet come into human consciousness is unmanifest time. And so that's the circle that, we may lose over generations some knowledge. It can become unmanifest again as we go around the great circle.
and
But
so Thomas, did you come to understand that the unmanifest is like it's always there? It's just not in the
in the consciousness of the
yes,
humans.
of the culture and of the individual. But then it
That's-
moves in and it can
that's-
move out. Yeah.
Well, see, we have trouble getting that because then it's in the past, right? If it's been forgotten, or it's in the future because we haven't manifested it yet.
Or but in this, what the Hopi gentleman was saying, it doesn't go, it just moves out of what I think,
More like a spiral, maybe.
yeah,
Mm.
and then comes back around. I mean, there is so much. We have been mighty clever as Western cultures. We just have come up with all sorts of stuff. And you look back at the turn from the 18th to the 19th century, just in Vienna alone, and you've got Freud, and you've got Otto Wagner, and you've got Klimt. Otto Wagner was doing architecture and came up with the Jugendstil, the kind of Art Nouveau stuff, or really elaborated that. And then Klimt, all of the artists were saying phooey on representational art and doing something else. So we can come up with these big shifts that in some ways, Thomas, it seems like catapult some things into unmanifest and bring other things in to manifest. And of course, that's just for those people at that time, but then it gets passed down along to the rest of us as being, this is legitimate culture. So that's very fascinating to think of it that way.
I think another problem is the English language and the way it's structured, because that's how we structure our thoughts, is through English.
Yes.
And English is a very linear, very subject-object oriented. And if you study Chinese language, that is just sort of it's pictographic. So they take a concept and sort of, how does that go together imagistically? But there isn't that linear stretched out of how to say things. And you're leaving lots of space for people to sort of interpret what you're saying.
Yeah.
And this too is the poet's task, to leave a lot of space.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really, it's profound to think that, I mean, we walk through life thinking this is reality, this is the way things are. But it's based on our language, based on our history, based on our culture. And it is not some kind of ultimate truth at all. And I love that some of that illusion can get
Another thing I've been thinking about a lot lately, which I think has to do with time and certainly fits with the circular time that you're describing, Peggy, and what you've been describing, Thomas, the manifest and unmanifest, is attention.
Mm.
Now, this is a thing that, Gary and I often remind ourselves and remind all of you, don't believe anything we say. Check it out for yourself, see what you think. But the thing that I've been really playing with is, in this experience of a life, is there anything really I have control over? And I keep going, oh, no. There's this practice also in Hinduism called neti neti. And that is just, do I have control over that? No. Do I have control over that? No. So not this, not that, not this, not that. And so far, I can't find much, or even anything that I have control over reliably, except this thing that conceptually we phrase as attention. I can decide where to place my attention. Now, to what extent? And I think that's an interesting thing to have to say to myself, okay, sweetheart, this is what you've got. So you just place your attention wherever you like. That means I can go into the unmanifest. That means, even as a social scientist, even as empirical as I am, I can play around with what might be out there. What is it that we're missing? What's at the edges? What's at the periphery? Any of us can do that, and any of us can question. And we kind of I feel like I'm an inheritor of some of the boldness of the hippie generation, where there was all this just question authority all the time. So for me, it's, do I really want to place my attention solely on what kind of contingency would it be? How do I avoid death as long as I can? Which is something that I'm deeply socialized to do. How can I, as a woman, not be offensive to anybody? Really? Do I want to buy that? Do I want to place my attention on that? So.
Well, and when you say attention, to me, that is an invitation, or can be an invitation into present moment awareness. I mean, because that's really all any of us forget time. All of us never have anything but right now. We don't have the past, we don't have the future, but we occupy through our brains an awful lot of theoretical about, well, what if this happens in the future, and
Right.
why did this happen in the past? And that is a kind of putting attention, but it seems like it's removed from the experience of life itself.
This is, yeah. So what else is coming to mind or to heart?
Well, I was thinking that's a case where time is a useful tool for us, so we can meet at Elk River in August, and we can know when the tide is high, so we can get our ships off the sand. It's a useful tool to get things done in the physical world. But it is also a cruel master if we pay that sort of negative attention. I'm wasting too much time. I'm not going to meet my goals before I die, or I'm going to be, I'm almost 68. I'm probably not going to climb Mount Everest in this lifetime, So I could say, I can use it as a tool to say what I haven't accomplished, what's wrong with me,
Yeah.
Or I can sit and contemplate the magnolia blossom.
Yeah, or the emergent witch hazel.
Yeah, isn't it interesting how much time has been, used as a construct for productivity? I mean, the relationship between this insistent division of time and how much you produce that's will deem worthwhile within a given measure of that time. That's become rather, I think, toxic to say the
Well,
least.
because then productivity is equated with self-worth.
Yeah.
Your worth as a being is equated with how much you've produced, which is and produced by whose criteria of what
Right,
are and
right.
aren't worthy productions. What about really cool thoughts? That doesn't count as a production, right? What about walking past somebody on the street post-COVID and smiling at them and looking at them in the eye? This is not something that we are instructed is valuable. So I've got another thing to suggest
Mhm.
for consideration, and that is to consider what attention without interpretation is. Attention without interpretation. And that's a very curious thing for me.
That's a very hard practice. To first
And
of all
how
not name
come?
something,
Right.
and then to analyze it and get a whole thought process going on it, to just see it and be there with it. That's really, really hard.
Yeah.
Or is it what kind of habit have we inherited? Probably, Peggy. It's not just something that we've learned in this lifetime and built into this life. It's probably the force of enculturation that's moving through as well. But what if what we've learned is to be out of our lives by interpreting, by placing, because interpretation can only come from past understandings,
Right.
past in time,
Mhm.
if we buy the linear time bit. But interpretation, oh, that's cool. I just went to, how about interpretation from the, whispering and manifest? Oh, I like that. I'm going to play with that.
Your week is set. That's good.
Yeah, but I meditation, perhaps, present time awareness without, Sue, we have been, and Gary, and Thomas, we've been in some meditative time where there's just no agenda. Nothing but the invitation to keep dropping into the quiet or the large, the big, beneath everything or above everything, just what can't be described. And when those things start picking up our consciousness, just to say, I'll get back to you. And so that is kind of an exercise in attention without interpretation, potentially.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and I wonder how much your ability to perceive expands related to your ability to not interpret. I've talked
Right.
before about Einstein going out when he was stuck on a problem he was working on at Princeton into the Institute woods, which they sort of maintained with him in mind, and he would look around him at that woodland and just know that he was on a fool's errand, but just begin by trying to analyze from his left brain, if you will, intellectually, what all was going on in what he was seeing. And of course, we still don't know barely what goes on in a square yard of dirt, let alone a forest. So he was not capable of doing it, but it sort of blew his mind intentionally. He went there because he knew at some point he'd have to surrender all of that analysis. And in the wake of that surrendering was a kind of holistic perception that he was able to go back to his, chalkboard and often have fairly significant breakthrough moments because he had managed to touch some sort of holistic perception that was different than his everyday awareness.
That's the invitation. There's no way, I don't think, in my lifetime. It would be interesting to hear from the rest of you. I want to stay with what I said to you, Peggy. Don't give up. Don't give up. It could be that there will be some moments in my life that are quite extended. Could be, really, where I'm just, we all have this, where we're just really capable or in being aware before any thought, being just aware before any thought, because that's going on whether we're paying attention to it or not. That's probably the only thing that has any continuity. And so, but at the same time, I think in all of that, in the awareness that's there, that quiet, Ram Dass, after he had his stroke, he said, you know, it's all really white noise. It's really quite pleasant. So, but that to forgive ourselves for the fact that we are deeply socialized and we are going to fall off into these old habits. This is what the brain, the neurophysiology knows how to do. It's going to do those reflexive sorts of things. But we also have the opportunity in the gathering of people like this to invite ourselves to that possibility of questioning, you know, time. Can we flip time for ourselves from being this very serious thing to being more like curious? Isn't that something that we organized the procedure of seasons into this kind of calendar?
I wonder too if our ability to sort of be attentive in the moment is undermined by too much in our culture that for profit looks to exploit anxiety in us, and certainly news can do that, social media can do that, and I wonder if it even manifests ultimately in that, hey, I'm out for a fall walk and the leaves are beautiful, and I may have a strong tendency to go, but yeah, but you know, in a few weeks it'll just be snow and they'll all be gone, you know. So instead of kind of being with that beautiful moment and savoring it and putting my attention there, the attention gets a little bit diluted or some additive put on it, so that I have to start worrying about, well, this is so transient.
Oh, you don't have to.
Yeah, but it's a habit, and
yeah.
and I think that kind of almost, that's a mild example of anxiety, but I think we are sort of being trained to be even more anxious than humans have perhaps been in the past.
Anxious and obsessive and depressed. Oh, bless us. Oh my goodness, bless us, bless us. So, but
too
Carol,
much information.
yeah,
We all suffer from too much information. I know I was looking out my window today and the leaves are still stuck on my apple trees because we had the frost so early. But it was beautiful against the snow. Instead of saying, oh my God, that's beautiful against the snow, I'm like, oh, that's a symptom of climate change. Oh my God, now I'm using too much propane boiling my tea and blah, blah, blah. And just get into the spiral of too much information coming in.
Yes.
So Carol, I wanted to follow up with you. You were describing that time right after COVID, when you just would walk and time would just pass, and it was, you would be surprised how much clock time had gone. You must have felt little of this anxiety that Gary's describing, of this compulsion.
Yeah, it was kind of like a breath of fresh air to not have anywhere to have, I had to be, or, you know, I wasn't traveling. I decided I'd just stay home, which I don't do very often, you know. So it was wonderful. Another thing I do down here, I live in the Four Corners area now, and I went to Chaco Canyon for the first time a few years ago and got to see where they had marked all these places where the sun rose and the sunset, you know, in their architecture.
Yeah.
So from my front of my house now, I take a picture almost on about the 20th or 21st of the month for the sunrise or sunsets mostly. If I'm up early enough in the morning, I'm trying to catch the sunrises on the other side. And it's been really fun. You know, I was looking at it tonight, looking at where it was tonight, actually, because it was poking through the clouds. My goal is to try and find the best picture for each month and make a, you know, collage or something.
Oh, I love that.
That's wonderful.
Keep us posted.
That's
fabulous.
It's fun. And I tell my neighbors, you know, in July the sun's setting over your house, and they have no idea. It's just taking notice. But I live in the valley, and I can just have this beautiful expansive of view to track it. It's been kind of fun.
Yeah.
Wow, I like
Yeah,
that.
it's a different kind of calendar. Step aside, Julius Caesar.
Well, the ancestral Puebloans were using it for their plantings and harvest and all that, which I'm not doing, but I'm just following it for like modern day common interest, I guess, because I don't plant.
I love it.
There's a great circularity in that activity. That's
Mhm.
it's beautiful.
So Carol, no kidding, keep us posted. We'll help you get the word out. If you decide to make a calendar, that'd be so great.
Yeah, thank you. I found that
Yeah.
some of the most beautiful sunsets seem to be in February.
Huh.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's really odd. Yeah, it's amazing the sunsets in the winter, but February.
Valentine's.
wow. That's very cool.
Yeah. Nice. Well, Pixie or Sandy or Sue, do you have anything to add to this conversation today?
We're just thinking about the seasons and you're talking about the things coming into bloom, and I'm watching here in Southern California the blossoms on the magnolias are starting to swell,
Wow.
Oh,
and I'm trying to see things feel different because we have had so much rain in the last 3 weeks. So how much is because of the length of the day, the hours of sunshine, and how much is because of the additional rainfall?
Yeah. Yeah.
well,
So
and
just-
this is that dance, Sue. It's like the magnolias know what to do. They're just adjusting. Remember how the Yellowstone River figured it out? It may
Yeah.
have messed up a lot of human stuff, but it figured it out.
Yeah.
You think that's an explanation? I mean, it's got to be different for the magnolia to have this much water.
Yeah. I mean, they usually do bloom sometime in January here, but it kind of feels a little bit earlier.
It does seem like there are a lot of aspects of nature that, certainly go by the length of daylight as to whether they're going to trigger their genetic expression of flowering or fruiting or whatever it is. But then they can be, it seems like, influenced by heat or cold or, things like that. And so it seems like moisture might be a factor.
And it's funny to watch, like some of the wildflowers. We'll have a dry year, and there's the normal time of year for them to bloom. But then if we get a late rain, like the monsoons, and we get a good downpour, then suddenly it's completely the wrong time, and they're blooming.
Oh.
It's like, okay, I got a last gasp here. I've got one more chance to reproduce. I know it's not the right time, but I'm going for it.
Yeah.
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 Smart.
I could say a couple of things that come to mind that fit with, noise or when it isn't there and what has come through, and with time and all. And one was I was working on a math problem. It was a class online and had a certain amount of time to do this final, and you could this was one of the problems, and I just couldn't. It was fun to do and all, but I couldn't come up. I was trying to put some old memories and stuff were coming in, and I was getting part of it, but and wasn't coming, and I was trying to, it wasn't coming. And that night I went to bed, and I can't remember if I was thinking about, well, it would be on my mind when I went to bed. Well, I had a dream, and I'm thinking now, it just, that about all the normal noise like stuff when you're sleeping, and a lot of that falls away, and we have a dream that gives us insight to something. And that's what I'm thinking about looking back at it. I woke up and I thought, my friend thinks she's Joan of Arc. The Arc thing was the idea, was a piece. I didn't get to the total solution, because that was the final day, but that gave me a piece. I knew the arc, and in the mathematical thing, it was kind of on the number line and to get a little formula and stuff. It was a piece of that,
Ah,
and
And that's how it came to you in your dream.
yeah,
that's
like
really
that.
good.
And I'm thinking how, the clarity, because that's gone away. And the other thing that just came now, um, to me, that happened many years ago. I changed. Well, it had to do with getting the shower, taking the shower, and what happened again, like I think the water hitting my head and giving more clarity, kind of a clearness and stuff. And I had a couple images come. It related to taking the trip back, well, to Western Pennsylvania at the time I lived in California. And I had canceled the trip earlier in the day. And my father had been disappointed, but I just think, but in the shower episode, these couple images related to back there, a group of women in a circle. And I think my Aunt Opal, somehow, she wasn't in this particular circle, but the two images came. I decided then, okay, I'd go ahead and go back. And I took the overnight flight then and went. And there were two very important events. And they
Yeah.
were with a kind of a reunion, and they were these older women, well, and on my dad's side in a circle. And it was I had been outside looking at very interesting. When I went in, there they were, and they were it was a really nice group. The feeling was wonderful,
Wow.
and yeah, of how they got along, and that special feeling that you can get, almost like, it verges on the kind of mystical, or it's very calming and
I can
special.
feel it as you describe it, Sandy. I can feel it in my chest area, in my heart. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
And yeah, and then on the same trip, and in a few days, I went to visit my Aunt Opal, and this was probably about 1987 when I did this. But her husband, Uncle Johnny, had died in 84. My mother had died in 1980. Well, when Uncle Johnny was in the hospital, his wife, Aunt Opal, and his children, went. They were, adults, and they were there knowing he was going to pass. And he says, well, there's Catherine. And Aunt Opal says, well, that's not, she's dead. She died. No, she's right over there. She's right there. And she's saying, come on, Johnny. Come on, Johnny.
Wow.
And so then they had left. But, my aunt wasn't open to stuff in a way like that. But that's the first time I'd been told about that. And it was about 3 years, I guess, probably from when he had died. He died that night. But she told me about it there. And that was the two parts in the shower. I had those images come.
Wow.
You
And,
would have missed that if you hadn't gone.
Yeah.
This is,
Yeah. There's such
yeah.
mystery there. And
And
wow.
so much encouragement in that story to follow our intuition, to follow.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? It probably means what's been forbidden from our logical reductive minds.
oh,
Just follow that we know with our heart. And what does that mean? Well, one thing that I've been curious about and proposed to my students in classes before is, it seems like we have spent thousands of years now with the heart in service to the mind. And that's probably backwards. It's time to move it. And like you were saying, Thomas, about time being a tool, moving the mind in service of the heart. So, but that takes a willingness to place our attention in a place that we're not enculturated or socialized to place our attention.
Mhm.
Pixie, before we go, is there anything you're thinking that you'd like to add?
Well, your discussion of clock time was really interesting. And the more I think about it, the more I think there should be two different words for clock time and doing things with the seasons or whatever. It's kind of like maybe cars and trucks or something, that they're similar, but there needs to be more of a differentiation because our reactions to them and what we do, how we let them control us is really very different.
This, I remember when I was being a professor, I remember being in Portland, Oregon one year and going, I think I totally missed autumn. I think I missed it because I was so bound to clock time that I was just moving so fast that I didn't make eye contact with autumn. Or that seems like what had happened. So, I really appreciate that, Pixie.
Yeah, the physicists who see time as a landscape containing past, present, and future, where time doesn't pass and time doesn't flow for a quantum physicist, they refer to it as block time. It's not clock time, it's block time. So everything contained within that block. I don't know. It's not particularly poetic, but
I know. Let's work on that.
Yeah, let's work on that. That's the assignment for next month. Come up with a better term for something besides clock time.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yes.
I have a question. It was about what you said about the mystical, and I can't remember the second word that's the basis of all religions. Mystical.
No, that the mystical, that there are mystical traditions. If you look back in
yeah,
deep in Christianity, deep in Judaism, deep in Islam, and those are the three dominant Western and East. Anyway, those, if you look back in those, you find that there is so much in the mystical tradition. And then you look at the Eastern traditions and you find that there's so much overlap. So is that what you were thinking about, Sandy?
Yeah, I just thought that it had just been kind of, shortened to like mystical something. There was a second word, and but I know that what you were saying. It's a basis.
Earlier, I did say that I describe myself as an empirical mystic or as a mystic realist.
Maybe it was mystical realism. Is that?
Yeah,
could have been.
Could have been, because that's the play. And
mysticism. Yeah,
I think that's it. If you ever have seen the book, The Century of the Gene, where they came like this close to figuring everything out, they're like, we're going to find the missing link. We're really, really close. Look, there are these little things. Essentially, DNA and RNA are pretty stupid. And there's these little wiggly things that come in and tell DNA and RNA what to do. And then they looked a little closer and everything went, whew. And that's why people who are the most rigorous scientists are sometimes the most holy folks, because they keep seeing, whoa, there's way more out there. We're not any place near this. And so that's that, for me, the mystical realism.
Yeah, I'm happy we don't have it all figured out.
Me too.
Close, not even close.
So wonderful to see you all.
Thank you all for spending the time with us tonight.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add one thing. This book has been really meaningful. I love this book.
Yeah.
Cool.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
As the daughter of a geologist.
We referred to it in full ecology. And I think it just fell out. I have a postcard from Marcia. Because we sent her full ecology and she read it and she was just really pleased with the way we rendered it in full ecology.
It's a great book, though. I mean, talk about it blowing your mind on time issues. It's a wonderful read.
Yeah, and with your father being a geologist, that's very cool.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, everybody,
Be
keep
well.
us posted.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Big love to you all.
Right.
See you next month.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Stay healthy.
Yeah,
too.
thanks. You
Thank
too, every
you.
one of you.